you mentioned the MV Burima, and for those who may not be aware of what is happening in Guyana, a ship with a number of persons sank off Guyana's coast, and so there were families that were unfortunately affected, like almost entire families that were wiped out in that incident. And I want to ask you a question about that. Because this grieving is happening in the public space, and there's a lot of distraction, not just public commentary, but issues related to information and logistics and even politics and so forth, right? It's all encompassing. In situations like this, are families really able to grieve effectively and find closure when all of this is happening in the public space and there's so much distraction? Are those affected families able to really grieve properly and find closure?
You know, that's a really legit. That's an important question. There's a reason why famous families or families who, for whatever reason, have been thrown into the public space, into the public sphere, ask for privacy during their grieving process, because all of these different voices complicate the process. Remember that I need my mental and emotional resources to be focused on helping me go through this difficult circumstance. So when you start to talk to me about politics, and you start to talk to me about logistics, and you start to talk to me about ferry services and the legal aspect of this, and you bring all of that in, my brain cannot focus on what is important to me right now, what is most urgent, which is grieving this loss.
Yeah.
And so all of these extraneous elements in this discussion, all of them just combine to make it difficult. So what could very likely happen is 2 years down the line, this conversation is still ongoing. So I still haven't grieved. And typically, grieving occurs, the bulk of a person's grieving occurs in the first 6 to 9 months after the loss. Now, if in the first 6 to 9 months, the conversation is diverted to all kinds of other things, you can see how I'm postponing that grieving process. And in so doing, I am prolonging and extending and complicating a process that my brain might just have 6 months to do. So by the time we get to that place, I am so messed up that I have difficulty returning to normal functioning. And so now I have anxiety or depression or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, and certainly post-traumatic stress disorder. Now I have a mental illness or mental disorder on top of the grief that has not been processed.
That is absolutely mind-blowing in many ways. And so our prayers continue to be with those families well, and we really hope that they are able to find closure. But talking about closure also, when we talk about grief, it means that there's been a rupture, which also begs the question of when would healing happen. And so my question to you is, does healing from grief mean merely moving on, or is it more accurate to think of grief and the grieving process as learning to move on?
Yeah, I think in your question, you've answered it better than I probably would have. So grief is not moving on, because you never really overcome, in the context of losing a loved one, you never really overcome that loss. And for example, I have experienced situations where parents in their 90s saw a photograph or were drawn into a conversation about their child that they had lost 70 years ago. And they were crying as though it just happened. So you never overcome it, really. You never overcome that loss, but you learn how to manage without that person. So, like you correctly stated, grief is more about learning how to deal with the loss than dealing with the loss. However, you do get to a point eventually where there is some measure of closure and acceptance, and you're able to return to a measure of normalcy. By the way, it's now your new normal. So you're able to, over a course of time, formulate your new normal. And so the average person in 6 months, 9 months, maybe 12 months, and I don't know why we tend to move in multiples of 3. Somewhere along that timeline, we're normal again. If at the 12-month, somewhere between 9 and 12 months, an individual is still in the same emotional space they were when they got the news of the loss, then it becomes what we call in psychology complicated grief. And that suggests that there are some circumstances, some underlying circumstances that have not been dealt with, that are, those circumstances are not allowing that person to move, to graduate to the point where they are now able to cope. And so at that stage is where people need psychological and sometimes psychiatric help.